He brought his ex-girlfriend to our engagement party and introduced her as his creative consultant. By the end of the night, he was on his knees in my penthouse begging me not to leave, as I revealed I owned the entire tech empire he'd been desperately trying to impress all evening. Before we dive back in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if this story hit home, hit that subscribe button. I've got something really special lined up for tomorrow. I never imagined I'd be the woman hiding millions from the man I planned to marry. Honesty had always been my cornerstone, the principle that built my tech consulting firm from a college dorm room idea into something much bigger. But sometimes life teaches you the difference between secrecy and strategic silence, between lies and simply waiting for someone to ask the right questions. My name's Camille, and 3 months ago, I was engaged to a man named Trevor Walsh. We met 2 years earlier at a startup networking event in downtown Portland, where he was pitching his marketing agency to potential clients. Trevor was magnetic, confident, and had this way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room. Coming from a background where I was always just the quiet tech girl, finding someone who seemed fascinated by my thoughts was intoxicating. Trevor ran a boutique marketing firm called Walsh Creative, specializing in tech company launches and brand positioning. He loved talking about his high-profile clients, the million-dollar campaigns he orchestrated, and his connections throughout Silicon Valley. I would listen with genuine interest, impressed by his passion and drive, even when I sometimes noticed he placed enormous value on status and perception. "When we're married," he'd say, pulling me close during our evening walks through Pioneer Square, "we'll be the power couple everyone talks about. I'll introduce you to all the right people, and together we'll build something incredible." What Trevor didn't know, what I hadn't found the courage to share, was that I wasn't just Camille Rodriguez, who ran a small tech consulting business from a converted warehouse in the Pearl District. I was also the anonymous founder and CEO of Nexus Innovations, a software development company that had quietly revolutionized data analytics for Fortune 500 companies. My little consulting firm was actually the public face of a tech empire worth over $50 million. My father had been a brilliant programmer who died when I was 16, leaving behind a revolutionary algorithm he'd been developing in our garage. My mother, overwhelmed with grief and financial pressure, had wanted to sell his work to the highest bidder. Instead, I convinced her to let me finish what he'd started. Working nights through high school and college, I transformed his prototype into the foundation of what would become Nexus Innovations. I'd chosen to remain completely anonymous, operating through a complex web of shell companies and trusted intermediaries. The tech world knew Nexus as an innovative powerhouse, but no one knew the 28-year-old woman behind it. I told myself it was about privacy, about avoiding the spotlight that came with Silicon Valley success stories. But if I was honest, it had become about something else entirely, about testing whether someone could love Camille, the person, not Camille, the tech mogul. When Trevor and I started getting serious, I kept waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. At first, it seemed unnecessary. We were just dating, getting to know each other. Then, as months passed, I began noticing subtle patterns that made me hesitate. Whenever I demonstrated too much technical knowledge or business insight, Trevor would smile condescendingly and change the subject. When I suggested improvements to his client strategies, he'd pat my hand and explain why I didn't understand the bigger picture. "You're so sweet when you try to talk business," he'd say, kissing my forehead after I'd offered suggestions that could have saved his clients thousands. "That's what I love about you. You're supportive without trying to compete." I started downplaying my achievements, letting him believe my consulting business was modest and struggling. When Nexus Innovations made headlines for a breakthrough in predictive analytics, I listened to Trevor explain the technology to me as if I'd never heard of machine learning algorithms. When his clients faced problems I could solve in my sleep, I bit my tongue and watched him stress over solutions I'd pioneered years earlier. The engagement came after 18 months of this careful dance. Trevor proposed at the top of Mount Hood, with the city sprawling below us, and a ring that must have cost him months of savings. He said, "I want to give you everything," as he slipped the diamond onto my finger. "You deserve a life where you never have to worry about your little business struggling. I'll take care of us both." I said yes, telling myself that once we were married, once his ego was secure, I could finally share the truth about Nexus. But planning our engagement party forced me to confront how deep the deception had become. Trevor insisted on hosting the celebration at the Cascade Ballroom, Portland's most exclusive venue. "I've been cultivating a relationship with their event coordinator for months," he announced proudly. "Getting a booking here usually takes a year in advance, but I called in some serious favors. This is going to put us on the map with everyone who matters in this city."
What Trevor didn't know was that Nexus Innovations had purchased the Cascade Ballroom 3 years earlier as part of our real estate investment portfolio. I'd been personally involved in its renovation, transforming the historic space into a technology showcase while preserving its Art Deco elegance. The favors he'd called in were simply requests processed by my own property management team. As the engagement party approached, Trevor became increasingly obsessed with the guest list. He wanted to invite tech executives, venture capitalists, and industry influencers, essentially turning our celebration into a networking opportunity for Walsh Creative. "This is our chance to really establish ourselves," he explained over dinner, scrolling through contacts on his phone. "With the right people there, the right conversations, we could take Walsh Creative to the next level." I focused on inviting my close friends, my development team, who Trevor assumed were just fellow consultants, and the small circle of people who knew the real me. The contrast between our approaches should have been a red flag, but I was still hoping we could bridge the gap between his ambitions and my hidden reality. 2 weeks before the engagement party, Trevor dropped a bombshell that shattered my remaining illusions about our relationship. "I've added a few key people to the guest list," he mentioned casually while we reviewed catering options, "including Jade Kingsley from my creative team. She's been instrumental in landing the Morrison Tack account." The name made my stomach drop. Jade Kingsley wasn't just his creative director, she was his ex-girlfriend, the ambitious marketing executive he dated for 2 years before we met. Trevor had mentioned her occasionally, always professionally, but with an undercurrent that had made me wonder about unresolved feelings. "Your ex-girlfriend will be at our engagement party?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Trevor's expression remained carefully composed. "That was years ago, Camille. She's a colleague now, and frankly, one of the most connected people in Portland's tech scene. Not inviting her would be career suicide when half the industry is going to be there." I studied his face, noting the slight defensiveness in his posture, the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Of course," I said finally. "It's your professional network." But that night, lying awake beside him, I felt something shift fundamentally in my understanding of our relationship. If Trevor was comfortable bringing his ex-girlfriend to our engagement party without discussing it with me first, what did that say about his respect for me? More troubling, if I couldn't be honest about my own success with the man I was planning to marry, what kind of foundation were we actually building? The morning of our engagement party arrived with Portland's typical spring drizzle. As I prepared for the evening that would either be the beginning of our married life or the end of our relationship, I made a decision that had been building for months. Tonight, I would finally tell Trevor the truth about Nexus Innovations. After the party, when we were alone, I would show him the documentation, the bank statements, the proof that his struggling consultant fiancé was actually one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the Pacific Northwest. Standing in my bathroom, applying makeup that would hide the sleepless circles under my eyes, I practiced the words I'd been afraid to say for 2 years. "Trevor, there's something about my business I need to share with you." But as I slipped into my carefully chosen navy dress, elegant but understated, successful but not threatening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was preparing for battle rather than celebration. The woman in the mirror looked confident, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Tonight would test everything Trevor claimed to believe about supporting my dreams, about wanting a partnership of equals. Tonight would reveal whether the man I'd agreed to marry could handle being a woman who didn't need his protection, his connections, or his permission to succeed. What I didn't realize was that Trevor had his own revelations planned for the evening, ones that would force my hand in ways I never could have anticipated. The Cascade Ballroom awaited, its soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers ready to witness either the celebration of our future or the spectacular collapse of everything I'd thought I wanted. As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, I touched the small flash drive in my purse, the one containing proof of everything I'd hidden. One way or another, tonight would be the end of living a lie. I just had no idea how dramatically the truth would set me free. This one took us ages to get right, so if you're loving it, hitting subscribe would honestly mean the world to us. Okay, back to business.
The ambient lighting is all wrong, Jade was saying, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. This isn't a corporate product launch, Trevor. It's supposed to be romantic, memorable. We need something that will photograph well for the industry publications. My breath caught. Industry publications? This was our engagement party, not a marketing opportunity. But Trevor was nodding eagerly, hanging on her every word like she held the keys to his professional kingdom. "You're absolutely right," he agreed, his tone warm with admiration. "I knew bringing you in was the right call. Your eye for these details is exactly what this event needs." I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the marble loud enough to announce my presence. They turned in unison, guilty surprise flickering across both their faces before Trevor composed himself with practiced ease. "Camille, you're early, sweetheart," he said, striding toward me with arms outstretched. "I was just getting Jade's input on some last-minute adjustments. You remember Jade Kingsley, my creative director." Jade's smile was professionally polite, her assessment of me swift and dismissive. She took in my navy dress, my understated jewelry, my carefully controlled appearance, and I could see her cataloging me as harmless. Next to her vibrant presence, I felt deliberately invisible. "Of course," I replied, extending my hand. "Trevor's mentioned how instrumental you've been to Walsh Creative's success." Her handshake was firm, her skin cool against mine. "Likewise, I've heard so much about your little consulting business. It's sweet how supportive you are of Trevor's real work." The casual dismissal hit its mark. My little consulting business, the phrase Trevor must have used when describing me to his team. I felt heat rise in my cheeks but kept my expression neutral. "And what exactly are these adjustments you're making?" I asked Trevor. He laughed nervously, running a hand through his hair. "Just some minor tweaks to maximize the impact. Jade has experience with high-profile events, and I want tonight to be perfect for both of us." I looked around the ballroom, noting changes that definitely weren't in our original plans. The intimate seating arrangements I'd requested had been reconfigured into a more formal networking setup. The subtle floral arrangements were being replaced with towering displays that screamed, "Look at me." Most jarring, there was now a professional photographer setting up equipment in the corner. "A photographer?" I asked. "We decided against that, remember? You said you wanted to keep things intimate." "Change of plans," Jade interjected before Trevor could respond. "Marcus Chen from Portland Tech Weekly is here to cover the event. Trevor's been building relationships with industry media, and tonight could be featured in their next spotlight on rising marketing agencies." My mind reeled. Nexus Innovations was one of the publications that regularly covered Nexus Innovations, though they'd never connected my anonymous company to me personally. The irony of Trevor trying to impress a magazine that had written glowing profiles about my work was almost too much to process. "You invited press to our engagement party?" I asked Trevor directly, my voice carefully controlled. "It's just Marcus. He's practically a friend at this point. This kind of coverage could change everything for Walsh Creative. For us." "For us?" I repeated, slowly. "Or for you?" Jade stepped between us smoothly, her smile sharp. "I hope you don't mind, but we've also updated the catering menu. The original selection was a bit provincial for the caliber of guests Trevor's assembled. We need something that reflects the sophistication of Portland's tech elite. The casual dismissal of choices I'd spent hours making with the catering team, my own catering team, though neither of them knew that, pushed me closer to my breaking point. But what struck me most was the easy way she said, "we." When had my engagement party become their collaborative project? How thoughtful, I managed, though I should mention that I specifically chose that menu after extensive tastings. "Of course you did, sweetie," Jade replied, with condescending sympathy. "But Trevor and I have been to so many industry events. We know what works for this crowd. You'll love what we've selected instead." Trevor placed his hand on my arm, attempting to smooth over the obvious tension. "Darling, I know change is hard, but trust me on this. Tonight needs to make an impression on some very important people." "Important to whom?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Trevor's expression tightened. "Important for our future. The connections made tonight could transform my business, which benefits both of us. I thought you understood that." What I understood was that my fiancé had spent the day redesigning our engagement party with his ex-girlfriend, turning our celebration into his professional showcase without consulting me once. What I understood was that he viewed me as a prop in his ambition rather than a partner with opinions worth considering. "I need some air," I said, turning toward the terrace doors. "Camille, wait," Trevor started. "Just give me a few minutes," I called back, not trusting myself to say more without revealing exactly how much his disrespect was costing him. The terrace overlooked downtown Portland, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening dusk. From this height, I could see the Nexus Innovations building a few blocks away, its sleek glass facade reflecting the sunset. My real office, where my real team was probably working late on projects that would generate more revenue tonight than Trevor's agency made in a quarter.
My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant, Zara. "Emergency at the party? Just got word from building security that someone's been asking questions about Nexus ownership. Want me to handle it?" My stomach dropped. Someone at tonight's party was investigating Nexus Innovations? The timing couldn't be coincidental. I quickly typed back, "Who's asking?" Marcus Chen, from Portland Tech Weekly, says he's working on a story about anonymous tech founders. Should I shut this down? Marcus Chen. The same journalist Trevor had invited to cover our engagement party was also investigating the identity behind Nexus Innovations. The journalist who was here, at Jade's suggestion, taking photos of an event at a venue owned by the very company he was trying to expose. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. This wasn't just about Trevor showcasing his agency to industry contacts. Someone suspected the connection between me and Nexus, and they were using my own engagement party to investigate. I typed back quickly, "Do we know who tipped him off?" The response came immediately. "Working on it, but Camille, if someone's connecting dots, tonight could get complicated fast." I stared at my phone, my mind racing through possibilities. Had I been too careless? Had someone at Walsh Creative put together the pieces? Or was this pure coincidence, a journalist following leads that happened to intersect with my carefully guarded secret? Through the terrace doors, I could see Trevor and Jade still conferring in the main hall, their body language intimate despite the professional context. Guests would be arriving soon for a party that no longer resembled anything I'd planned, in a venue they didn't know I owned, while a journalist hunted for information that could destroy the anonymity I'd spent years protecting. The irony was breathtaking. I'd been planning to tell Trevor the truth tonight, after the party, in the privacy of our apartment, as a gift of trust and transparency. Instead, I might be forced to reveal everything publicly, defensively, in front of industry peers and press who would dissect every detail of my deception. My phone rang. Zara again. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. Chen's not just investigating randomly. Someone provided him with specific information about Nexus's property holdings, including the Cascade Ballroom. He knows you're connected to tonight's event. Someone fed him information? My voice was barely a whisper. That's what it looks like. Professional-grade intel, not casual speculation. Camille, someone's actively trying to expose you, and they're using your engagement party to do it. I closed my eyes, feeling the carefully constructed walls of my double life crumbling around me. After 2 years of protecting Trevor's ego by hiding my success, someone else had decided to detonate my secret for their own purposes. Sarah, I said, my voice steadying with resolution. Activate Protocol 7. There was a pause. Protocol 7 was our emergency transparency plan, complete documentation of my ownership and achievements, prepared for legal protection but never used. You're sure? She asked. I looked through the doors at Trevor, still absorbed in conversation with Jade, oblivious to the fact that his networking event was about to become the site of the biggest revelation in Portland's tech scene this year. Someone wants to expose me tonight. Fine, but they're going to get more truth than they bargained for. As I ended the call and prepared to return to the party, I realized that the careful conversation I'd planned for later tonight had just become impossible. If Marcus Chen was going to reveal my identity anyway, at least I could control the narrative. Trevor had spent months dismissing my business acumen, letting his ex-girlfriend redesign our engagement party, and treating me like a charming accessory to his real ambitions. He wanted to network with Portland's tech elite tonight? Perfect, because he was about to discover he'd been sleeping next to the biggest name in the room. The only question now was whether his ego could survive learning that his supportive little consultant fiancé was actually the anonymous CEO every tech executive in Portland wanted to meet. Somehow, I doubted it. When I returned to the ballroom, guests had begun arriving in earnest. The space buzzed with conversation as Portland's tech elite mingled under the crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes catching the light. I moved through the crowd with new eyes, recognizing faces from industry events where I had remained carefully in the background, watching executives who had no idea they were celebrating in a venue owned by the very company he was trying to expose. Trevor was in his element, working the room with Jade at his side like they were hosting together. I watched him introduce her to David Kim, CEO of Portland's fastest-growing startup accelerator, and felt my jaw clench as she laughed at something David said, her hand touching Trevor's arm in a gesture too intimate for any professional relationship. Camille! Marcus Chen appeared at my elbow, notebook in hand and camera around his neck. We haven't met properly. Marcus Chen, Portland Tech Weekly. Trevor's been telling me about your consulting work. My pulse quickened. This was the journalist investigating Nexus Innovations, now standing inches away from me. Has he? And what exactly has Trevor told you about my work? Marcus smiled, but his eyes were calculating. That you run a small tech consulting firm. Modest operation, he said. But I'm always interested in the entrepreneurial ecosystem here. What kind of clients do you work with? Before I could answer, Trevor materialized beside us, his arm sliding possessively around my waist. Marcus, I see you've met my brilliant fiancé. Camille's being modest about her little business, as usual. The phrase little business felt like a slap. I watched Marcus's eyebrows rise slightly at Trevor's condescending tone, his journalist instincts clearly picking up on the dynamic. Actually, I said, stepping away from Trevor's grip, I think Marcus might be more interested in discussing the venue itself. The Cascade Ballroom has quite a fascinating history, doesn't it, Marcus? Marcus's attention sharpened immediately. It does indeed. Purchased 3 years ago by a private investment group for complete renovation, turned into one of Portland's most exclusive event spaces. The buyer remained anonymous, which is unusual for a project of this scale. Trevor looked confused by the turn in conversation. Anonymous buyer? I thought it was owned by some hotel management company. That's what most people think, Marcus said, his gaze fixed on me. But public records show it's actually owned by a shell company that traces back to, well, That's what makes it interesting. The paper trail leads to some very sophisticated corporate structures. I felt Trevor's confusion deepening as he looked between Marcus and me. Around us, the party continued, but I was acutely aware that we were standing at the edge of a precipice. Across the room, I spotted Zara near the entrance, giving me a subtle nod. Protocol 7 was ready. "You seem very well informed about Portland real estate," I observed to Marcus. "I'm working on a story about anonymous ownership in the tech sector. There's been speculation about connections between various properties and some of our city's more secretive tech companies. Nexus Innovations, for instance." The name hung in the air like a challenge. Trevor's expression shifted from confusion to irritation. "Could we maybe not talk business at my engagement party? There's plenty of time for networking without boring Camille with industry gossip." But Marcus wasn't backing down. "Oh, I don't think Camille would find this boring at all. Would you, Camille, considering your background in tech consulting?" I made my decision. The careful revelation I'd planned for later in private was no longer possible. If Marcus was going to expose me anyway, I would control how it happened. "You're absolutely right, Marcus. I find it fascinating." I turned to face Trevor fully. "In fact, since you're so interested in networking tonight, there's something I should share with everyone." Trevor's smile became strained. "Sweetheart, whatever it is, maybe we could discuss it later." "No, I think now is perfect." I moved toward the small stage where the string quartet had been playing, my heart pounding but my resolve crystal clear. "Excuse me, everyone?" The conversations gradually died as guests turned toward me. I could see Zara near the entrance, giving me a subtle nod. Protocol 7 was ready. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate with Trevor and me. Many of you know Trevor from his excellent work at Walsh Creative, and I know he's excited to connect with all of you this evening." Trevor was making his way toward the stage, clearly intending to join me, but I held up a gentle hand to stop him. "Before we continue with the festivities, I want to address something that's come up tonight. There's been some curiosity about the Cascade Ballroom itself, about its ownership and renovation." I paused, seeing Marcus Chen pulling out his phone to record. "I think it's time for complete transparency." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Trevor had stopped moving, his face pale with dawning comprehension that something was very wrong. "My name is Camille Rodriguez, and while many of you know me as Trevor's fiancé who runs a small consulting business, that's not the complete picture. I'm also the founder and CEO of Nexus Innovations." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as recognition dawned on face after face throughout the ballroom. David Kim's champagne flute stopped halfway to his lips. A woman near the bar whispered, "Holy shit," loud enough to carry. Marcus Chen was furiously typing on his phone. But it was Trevor's expression that held my attention. The confusion gave way to shock, then disbelief, then something that looked dangerously close to betrayal. "That's impossible," he said, his voice carrying in the hushed room. "Nexus Innovations that's a $50 million company. You run a consulting firm out of a warehouse." "I run Nexus Innovations out of a building I own 6 blocks from here. The warehouse is my secondary office space where I meet with smaller clients. But Nexus has been my primary focus for the past 7 years." Jade had pushed her way closer to the stage, her face a mask of calculation as she reassessed everything she thought she knew about the evening's dynamics. "You're saying you own this venue?" Trevor asked, his voice oddly hollow. "Yes. Nexus Innovations purchased the Cascade Ballroom through one of our investment subsidiaries 3 years ago. Every favor you called in to book the space was actually processed by my property management team. I was planning to tell you privately after tonight, but circumstances have made that impossible."
Marcus Chen stepped forward, journalist instincts overriding social niceties. "Miss Rodriguez, can you verify this claim? Nexus Innovations has maintained complete anonymity since its founding." Zara appeared at the edge of the stage with a tablet in hand. I accepted it and turned the screen toward the crowd, displaying the corporate documents I'd hoped never to need. "These are the incorporation papers for Nexus Innovations, filed 7 years ago," I said.
And here's the deed for this property, along with documentation of our other real estate holdings throughout Portland. The crowd pressed closer. Industry leaders who'd been speculating about Nexus's anonymous founder for years suddenly faced with the answer. I could see phones coming out, people frantically texting, the news already spreading beyond the ballroom. Trevor climbed onto the stage, his movements mechanical. 7 years? You've been running Nexus for 7 years and you never told me? I tried to find the right moment, I said, aware that our relationship was dissolving in front of Portland's tech elite, but unable to stop the process. But every time I demonstrated technical knowledge or business insight, you dismissed it. You made it clear that you needed to be the more successful partner. That's not, he started, then stopped, perhaps realizing how his words would sound to our audience. David Kim called out from the crowd, "Camille, your work on predictive analytics has been revolutionary. We've been trying to partner with Nexus for 2 years. The machine learning algorithms you developed changed our entire approach to data processing," added another voice. I watched Trevor's face as industry leaders praised work he never known I'd done, acknowledged expertise he'd never allowed me to display. The man who had spent the evening introducing Jade as his creative partner was learning that his fiancé had built an empire he'd never bothered to discover. "This is why you could afford..." He trailed off, perhaps calculating for the first time how someone supposedly running a struggling consulting firm could afford the lifestyle we'd shared. "The apartment, the car, the vacations we took," I confirmed. "Yes, I've been successful for quite some time, Trevor. I just haven't been able to share that success with you." Jade had gone completely silent, her earlier confidence evaporating as she realized the power dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically. The woman she dismissed as Trevor's supportive little consultant was actually the most influential person at the party. "But why?" Trevor asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Why hide this from me?" I looked at him, standing there, handsome and bewildered, surrounded by the tech executives he'd been so desperate to impress, and felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief. Because I was afraid that if you knew who I really was, you wouldn't want the version of me that comes with that success. And tonight has proven that fear was justified. The crowd had gone completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something far more significant than they'd expected when they came to celebrate an engagement. Marcus Chen stepped forward again, his professional instincts overriding the personal drama. "Ms. Rodriguez, would you be willing to give Portland Tech Weekly an exclusive interview about Nexus innovations and your decision to remain anonymous until now?" I looked out at the assembled crowd, at the faces of people who'd finally learned who I really was, then back at Trevor, who looked like his entire world had tilted off its axis. "I think we have a lot to discuss." The aftermath of my revelation rippled through the ballroom like a stone dropped in still water. Within minutes, my engagement party had transformed from Trevor's networking event into something entirely different, an impromptu tech industry summit with me at the center. David Kim was the first to approach the stage, his expression a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Camille, I've been trying to reach Nexus Innovations for months about the sustainability project. I had no idea I was sitting across from you at the Climate Tech Alliance dinner last month." Before I could respond, Sarah Martinez from Portland Business Journal pushed forward, her phone already recording. "This is the story of the year. The mysterious founder of Nexus finally revealed, and it happens at her own engagement party? Can you comment on why you chose tonight to go public?" I glanced at Trevor, who stood frozen beside me on the stage, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to catalog. The man who'd spent the evening trying to impress these exact people was watching them flock to me instead, seeking partnerships he'd only dreamed of securing. "The timing wasn't entirely my choice," I said diplomatically, stepping down from the stage to join the growing circle of industry leaders. Marcus Chen materialized with his camera ready. "Ms. Rodriguez, sources tell me someone has been investigating your connection to Nexus for weeks. Can you confirm whether tonight's revelation was defensive or strategic?" I felt Trevor's eyes on me as I considered the question. The truth was, someone had been feeding Marcus information, and I still didn't know who. But standing here, surrounded by Portland's tech elite, I realized I no longer cared about protecting the secret that had cost me so much.
Both, I said simply, and long overdue. Trevor finally found his voice. Camille, can we talk privately for a moment? The crowd parted as he approached, their attention shifting between us, like spectators at a tennis match. I could see Jade hovering near the champagne fountain, her earlier confidence replaced by calculating uncertainty as she watched her evening's plans crumble. Of course, I agreed, then addressed the crowd. Please, everyone, continue enjoying the party. I'll be available for conversations throughout the evening. Trevor led me toward a quiet alcove near the terrace doors, his grip on my arm tighter than necessary. Once we were semi-private, he turned to face me, his expression a volatile mixture of anger and bewilderment. $50 million, he said without preamble. You've been worth $50 million this entire time, and you let me pay for dinners? You watched me stress about securing clients you could have introduced me to with a phone call. I studied his face, searching for any sign that he understood why I'd hidden this part of myself. Would you have wanted those introductions if you'd known they came from me rather than your own efforts? That's not the point. His voice rose, then dropped as he remembered where we were. The point is that you lied to me for 2 years. You made me look like an idiot in front of the entire Portland tech scene. I never lied, Trevor. You made assumptions, and I didn't correct them. Same thing, he snapped. You let me believe I was supporting you, protecting you, building a future for us, all while you were secretly running an empire. I felt a familiar weight settle in my chest, the same feeling I'd carried for months whenever Trevor dismissed my contributions or explained concepts I'd mastered years ago. And that's exactly why I didn't tell you, because you needed to be the provider, the successful one. My achievements threatened that narrative. That's ridiculous, he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? What was the first thing you said when you learned about Nexus? That I made you look like an idiot? Not that you were proud of what I built, not that you were amazed by my success. Your immediate concern was how this reflected on you. Trevor opened his mouth to argue, then closed it as my words hit home. Around us, the party continued, but I could feel curious glances in our direction. And what about Jade? How does bringing your ex-girlfriend to redesign our engagement party fit into this narrative of protecting and supporting me? His face flushed. Jade is a colleague, a professional contact. Trevor. I kept my voice gentle despite the confrontation. I've watched you two tonight. The way she touches your arm, the way you light up when she speaks, the intimate planning sessions. If you're going to lie to me about Nexus, at least don't lie to me about her. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across his features. It's complicated. I'm sure it is. I glanced back toward the main hall, where Jade was now in animated conversation with several tech executives, clearly pivoting her attention to more promising connections. The question is whether you want to figure out those complications as my fiancé or as my ex-fiancé. Trevor followed my gaze, watching Jade work the room with practiced efficiency. She's not who I thought she was, he said quietly. Neither am I, apparently. He turned back to me, his expression shifting from anger to something more complex. How long have you known about Jade and me? I felt a strange sense of relief at his admission. I suspected for weeks. Tonight confirmed it. Nothing physical happened, he said quickly, but you're right about the feelings, about the complications.
I nodded, surprised by how little pain his confession caused. Perhaps I'd already begun detaching from this relationship before tonight's dramatic revelations. Thank you for being honest. We stood in awkward silence for a moment. 2 years of shared history hanging between us like a bridge neither of us wanted to cross anymore. So, what happens now? Trevor asked finally. Before I could answer, William Chen, not Marcus, but his cousin William, who ran Portland's largest venture capital firm, appeared at my elbow. Camille, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to catch you before you're completely mobbed. We should schedule lunch next week to discuss the Series C opportunities I mentioned to your team last month. I blinked in surprise. You've been in contact with my team? For months. Your CFO reached out for funding opportunities. Brilliant woman. Very thorough due diligence process. He glanced at Trevor curiously. I had no idea you two were connected. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My team had been pursuing funding opportunities without mentioning Trevor's connection to our industry. They'd been protecting the same secret I was, understanding instinctively that mixing my personal and professional lives could complicate both. Trevor's expression darkened as he processed this information. Your team knows about us? I said carefully, they know I'm engaged. They don't involve themselves in my personal decisions. Unlike my team, apparently, Trevor muttered, glancing toward Jade, who was now laughing at something David Kim was saying. William excused himself tactfully, leaving Trevor and I alone again. The music had stopped, and I realized the string quartet was packing up their instruments. How long had we been talking?
I should get back to the party, I said, though neither of us moved. Should you? It's supposed to be our engagement party, but it feels like your corporate coming-out celebration. His observation stung because it was accurate. What would you prefer, that I continue hiding who I am so you can feel more comfortable? I don't know, he admitted, running his hands through his hair. This morning, I thought I knew exactly who I was marrying. Tonight, I discover my fiancé is one of the most powerful people in Portland's tech scene, and I've been patronizing her for 2 years. You have been, I agreed quietly, but I let you. Trevor looked at me with something that might have been newfound respect. Why? Why diminish yourself for me? I considered the question, watching through the alcove opening as Portland's tech elite continued networking in the ballroom I owned, discussing deals with the woman they'd just learned was behind the city's most innovative software company. Because I thought love meant making space for someone else's insecurities, I said finally. I thought if I made myself smaller, you'd feel bigger, and somehow that would create a stable foundation for us. And now? Now I realize that kind of love isn't sustainable. It breeds resentment on both sides. Trevor nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the main hall where Jade was still working the crowd. She never made herself smaller for anyone. No, I agreed, she didn't, and neither should I. As if summoned by our conversation, Jade approached the alcove, her smile bright and professional. Trevor, there you are. David Kim wants to discuss potential collaborations with Walsh Creative. This could be exactly the break you've been looking for. I watched Trevor's face as he processed Jade's words. Even now, even knowing what I'd built, she was still positioning herself as his gateway to opportunities. The irony was breathtaking. She was offering him access to connections I'd had all along. Actually, I said, stepping forward, David and I have been discussing something different, a partnership between Nexus and several local agencies for our next product launch. Trevor, if you're interested, I'd be happy to include Walsh Creative in that conversation. The offer hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. Trevor could accept help from his secretly successful fiancé or maintain his independence through connections Jade promised but couldn't actually control. His choice would tell us everything we needed to know about whether our relationship could survive the truth about who I really was. Trevor stared at me for a long moment, my offer hanging between us like a bridge he wasn't sure he wanted to cross. I could see him weighing his options, accept help from the fiancé whose success he dismissed for 2 years, or maintain his independence through connections Jade promised but couldn't actually deliver. "You'd do that?" he asked, finally. "After everything that's happened tonight?"
Business is business, I replied evenly. Walsh Creative does good work. The question is whether you can handle partnering with someone you've spent 2 years underestimating. Jade stepped closer, her smile strained. Trevor, you don't need charity. David Kim was genuinely interested in Walsh Creative's portfolio. We've built something real together. The word together wasn't lost on me or apparently on Trevor, whose expression flickered with something that might have been guilt. But it was her use of charity that crystallized everything wrong with this moment. Offering genuine business opportunities to someone with relevant skills wasn't charity. It was professional collaboration. But Jade's framing revealed how she truly saw the situation. Accepting help from me would diminish Trevor's accomplishments. It's not charity, I said quietly. It's what partners do for each other. What they should do, anyway. Trevor looked between Jade and me, 2 years of complicated history written across his face. I need some air, he said finally. Can you both just give me a minute? As Trevor walked toward the terrace doors, Jade turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Quite a dramatic evening you've orchestrated. I didn't orchestrate anything. I responded to circumstances. Circumstances you created by lying to Trevor for 2 years. Have you any idea what this has done to him, learning that his supportive fiancé was actually condescending to him this whole time? I felt a flash of anger. Condescending? I hid my success to protect his ego. If that's condescending, what would you call explaining basic algorithms to someone who pioneered the field? I'd call it honesty about your respective capabilities, Jade replied smoothly. Trevor is brilliant at what he does. Not everyone needs to be a tech mogul to have value. The casual dismissal was perfectly crafted, acknowledging Trevor's abilities while subtly reinforcing that he couldn't compete in my world. It was manipulation dressed as defense, and I realized I was seeing exactly how Jade had undermined my relationship from within. You're right, I said, surprising her. Not everyone needs to be a tech mogul, but everyone deserves a partner who doesn't diminish their achievements or hide their own out of fear. Fear? Jade laughed. You're one of the most powerful people in Portland. What could you possibly fear? Exactly what happened tonight, that revealing my success would end my relationship. I paused, watching understanding dawn in her eyes. Though looking at how this evening has unfolded, maybe that fear was justified.
Before Jade could respond, Marcus Chen approached with his ever-present notebook. Miss Rodriguez, I hate to interrupt, but I've confirmed the ownership documentation. This story is going live in an hour. Do you have any final comments about your decision to remain anonymous until now? I glanced toward the terrace, where Trevor stood alone, his silhouette framed against the Portland skyline. Sometimes the people closest to us are the least prepared to see who we really are. Tonight forced everyone's hand, including mine. And your engagement? Marcus asked, his journalist instincts homing in on the personal drama. How does tonight's revelation affect your relationship with Mr. Walsh? It was a fair question, one I'd been avoiding since my public announcement. Looking around the ballroom, I saw the remnants of what was supposed to be our engagement celebration. Industry leaders were still networking, energized by the evening's unexpected revelations. My team had materialized from nowhere, efficiently managing the sudden interest in Nexus partnerships. The string quartet had packed up and left, but no one seemed to notice. I think, I said carefully, tonight has clarified a lot of things for both of us. Marcus scribbled notes, clearly sensing a story that went beyond anonymous CEOs coming forward. Will you be available for a full interview this week? Have my assistant schedule something. Then I realized the absurdity of maintaining any pretense. Actually, Zara's right over there. She handles my calendar for both Nexus and personal appearances now. As Marcus headed toward Zara, I found myself alone for the first time all evening. The revelation I dreaded for months was complete. The secret that had shaped my relationship with Trevor was public knowledge. And somehow, I felt lighter than I had in years. Camille. David Kim appeared beside me, 2 champagne flutes in hand. I wanted to thank you before the evening gets away from us entirely. What you've built with Nexus has inspired a lot of us. The fact that you've been doing it anonymously makes it even more impressive. I accepted the champagne gratefully. Thank you, though I'm not sure anonymity was the right choice anymore.
Maybe not for your personal life, he agreed, glancing toward the terrace where Trevor remained in silhouette. But professionally, it allowed your work to speak for itself. No preconceptions, no assumptions about what a young Latina entrepreneur could or couldn't accomplish. His observation hit home. I'd hidden from Trevor to protect his ego, but I'd hidden from the industry to protect my work from bias. One had been destructive, the other strategic. What happens now? I asked. Now you get to find out what it's like to build relationships based on complete honesty, professionally and personally. Trevor chose that moment to return from the terrace, his expression calmer but resigned. He approached slowly, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who'd made a difficult decision. Camille, can we talk? I nodded, following him to a quieter corner of the ballroom. The party continued around us, but it no longer felt like our event. It belonged to the industry now, a spontaneous networking summit that would be talked about for months. I've been thinking, Trevor began, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. About us, about tonight, about everything I thought I knew. I waited, sensing he needed to work through this at his own pace. You were right about me needing to be the successful one. I wanted to be the provider, the protector, the one with connections and influence. Finding out you've had all of that and more this whole time, it doesn't just change how I see you, it changes how I see myself. Trevor, let me finish, he said gently. I've also been thinking about Jade, about the feelings I've been trying to ignore. You asked earlier if I wanted to figure out those complications as your fiancé or ex-fiancé. My heart clenched, though whether from pain or relief, I couldn't tell. I think we both know the answer, he said quietly, pulling the engagement ring from his pocket. This isn't about Nexus or the money or even the deception. It's about the fact that we've both been pretending to be people we're not. I looked at the ring glinting in the ballroom's crystal light. What do you mean? You pretended to be less successful than you are. I pretended not to have feelings for someone else. We built a relationship on mutual self-deception. That's not fair to either of us. I took the ring, surprised by how little weight it carried. So what happens now? Trevor glanced across the room, where Jade was deep in conversation with several potential clients. Now I figure out what I actually want, instead of what I thought I should want. And you get to stop hiding from the world. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it, for the deception, for not trusting you with the truth. I'm sorry, too, for making you feel like you had to hide who you are, for bringing Jade tonight, for a lot of things. We stood there for a moment, 2 years of shared history settling into something that felt like peace rather than loss. For what it's worth, Trevor said, I am proud of what you've built, intimidated as hell, but proud. I smiled, feeling genuinely fond of him for perhaps the first time all evening. And for what it's worth, I hope you and Jade figure out whatever's between you. Just maybe not at your next girlfriend's engagement party.
Trevor laughed, a sound of genuine humor rather than social obligation. Deal. As he walked away, moving toward Jade and whatever future they might build together, I realized that our relationship had finally produced something honest. It's ending. 3 months later, I sat in my newly renovated office on the top floor of the Nexus Innovations building, the Portland skyline stretching out through floor-to-ceiling windows. The anonymity I'd maintained for years was gone, replaced by a visibility that had transformed both my company and my life. Portland Tech Weekly's feature story had sparked national coverage. Within weeks, I'd been invited to speak at conferences, join boards, and participate in initiatives I'd only been able to support anonymously before. The foundation I'd established in my father's name was funding scholarships for underrepresented students in computer science. Nexus Innovations had announced partnerships with 3 major companies, connections that materialized once I stopped hiding my role in their creation. My personal life had undergone an equally dramatic transformation. The energy I'd spent maintaining separate identities was now channeled into authentic relationships, both professional and personal. I'd reconnected with friends I'd distanced myself from during my relationship with Trevor, women whose success I'd found threatening to the careful balance I'd been maintaining. Trevor and Jade had indeed figured out their complications, launching a joint marketing firm that leveraged both their skills and their obvious chemistry.
I'd heard through industry connections that they were happy, building something together without the weight of hidden truths or diminished identities. As for me, I was learning what David Kim had predicted, what it felt like to build relationships based on complete honesty. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, requiring a level of vulnerability I'd been avoiding for years. My phone buzzed with a text from Zara. "Dr. Williams from Stanford is here for your lunch meeting. Should I send him up?" Dr. James Williams was a computer science professor I'd been corresponding with about establishing a research partnership between Nexus and his department. More personally, he's someone who'd known about my work long before my public revelation, someone who'd been intrigued by the brilliant mind behind Nexus Innovations, and remained interested after learning that mind belonged to a woman who'd been hiding her success from her own fiancé. "Send him up," I typed back, then stood and smoothed my skirt, checking my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me was the same person who'd stood in the Cascade Ballroom 3 months earlier, but she carried herself differently now. No more careful calculation of how much expertise to reveal, no more strategic diminishment of achievements. She was simply Camille Rodriguez, CEO of Nexus Innovations, daughter of a brilliant programmer, and someone who'd finally learned that the right person wouldn't need her to be less for them to feel like more. The elevator chimed, announcing James' arrival. As I turned toward the door, I touched the necklace at my throat, a simple pendant containing one of my father's original code fragments, transformed into jewelry by a local artist. It was a reminder that innovation often required the courage to build something entirely new from the pieces of what came before. My engagement party had ended with a broken relationship and a shattered secret. But sometimes the most beautiful structures rise from the ruins of what we thought we wanted, built on the stronger foundation of who we actually are.